Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Samanthropolitics. We have an amazing guest, Abigail Esmond, who is going to be talking to us about narcissism, patriarchy, and rage. Abigail, I just want to update the audience of a couple things, and then we'll bring you back into the stream.
Great, thanks.
So, as usual, crazy week in DC. So, the president was impeached for the second time. He's the only sitting president to have been impeached twice by the House of Representatives. And in addition, 10 Republicans joined the ranks of the Democrats in order to impeach him. Zach, can we just see that count of the impeachment? Is that first image? So 10 Republicans joined the ranks of the Democrats to vote for impeachment. I think it was really clear this week how... No, it's Zach. It's the one of the impeachment, of the impeachment count. So I think it became really clear. Thank you so much. I think it became really clear this week how many people were so profoundly disturbed by what happened, including the congresspersons themselves. I mean, this was an attack where they were physically in the building. So in terms of, you know, there's so many people that are always trying to get congresspersons to care about different things and to vote a certain way. I don't think there's really anything that you could have done that would convince congresspersons more to vote for impeachment than an attack on the Capitol where they physically were. They felt that fear. They felt that anxiety. They felt that worry. Congresspeople talking about how they're walking down the street or they're walking down the hall and they're wondering what happens if we're a bipartisan group and all of a sudden we come into contact with this armed mob. What is going to happen to us? So many congresspersons fearing for their lives. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez legitimately wondering, am I going to die if they get a hold of me? Also, very disturbing account of how Ayanna Priestley's office had panic buttons that were in the office. And on the day of the insurrection, they went to the panic buttons and they were mysteriously gone. They had disappeared and nobody had told her office. Another example of the security just being totally all over the place in terms of actually protecting these congresspeople and their staffers against this armed insurrection. So Trump still needs to be convicted by the Senate, in which case it would mean that he could never run for public office again. He would essentially be purged from the Republican Party. In the past, I would have said that that was unlikely to happen. However, Mitch McConnell is rumored to be in favor of impeaching the president. And Mitch McConnell is usually the president's lapdog. So the fact that he's in favor of impeaching the president is huge. In addition, of the 10 Republican congresspersons that voted for impeachment, one of them was Liz Cheney. Her name may sound familiar. She's the daughter of Dick Cheney of the Iraq War and George Bush era. She's the number 3 ranking Republican in the party, and she voted for impeachment. So it depends. Is the influence of these big Republicans going to influence Republican senators? And I think that remains to be seen. Likelihood is that the impeachment trial will not start until after President Biden is inaugurated. So I want to show you one of the arguments for the impeachment by one of the Republicans, because we could see the ones from the Democrats all day long. But here's one of the Republicans, Congressman Newhouse from Washington. Zach, can you clip that video for me?
Madam Speaker, this is a sad day in our republic, but not as sad or disheartening as the violence we witnessed in the Capitol last Wednesday. We are all responsible. My colleagues are responsible for not condemning rioters this past year, like those who barricaded the doors of the Seattle Police Department and attempted to murder the officers inside. Others, including myself, are responsible for not speaking out sooner, before the president misinformed and inflamed a violent mob who tore down the American flag and brutally beat Capitol Police officers. Madam Speaker, we must all do better. These articles of impeachment are flawed, but I will not use process as an excuse. There is no excuse for President Trump's actions. The president took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Last week, there was a domestic threat at the door of the Capitol, and he did nothing to stop it. That is why, with a heavy heart and clear resolve, I will vote yes on these articles of impeachment.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Pampers,
so one of the
the
things
number
that
one pediatric-
congresspersons repeatedly made clear in their speeches was the idea that the president is supposed to be protecting America and American citizens from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And I think because we have had such a view that the only type of terrorism is Islamic extremism, it's very new to say we have domestic enemies. I mean, we knew this with the Oklahoma City bomber, but now, again, as I've indicated in our national security reports, the biggest threat to American democracy is not external enemies. It's not foreign enemies. It's not World War III with another country. It is right here. It is homegrown. It is our friends, our neighbors, Olympic swimmers and actors from Arizona and retired policemen. It's right within us. And that's a really scary thing. And basically what Representative Newhouse said, and a lot of the other Republicans have voted for impeachment, is that he not only did not protect us from domestic enemies, but he incited the insurrection itself. He made sure that it happened. And when we needed the security backup, he did not call for the security backup in order to protect the congresspersons, their staff, and all of the other people that needed help and were scared for their lives. So something else that came out that was pretty interesting about the protesters was that this wasn't very lower economic, poor households that came. You have to have the money to fly to Washington or drive to Washington and pay for gas, pay for a not cheap hotel, and take time off of work to come protest. It was rumored that I don't even want to say his name because he makes me want to vomit. The Viking actor guy wouldn't eat the food given to him in custody because it wasn't organic. Okay, this is not people eating fast food. This is more affluent people. So in terms of how we think about who was protesting there was actually a level of middle-class affluence. And so now people are calling this the Pottery Barn insurrection, which I think is kind of interesting. And that's named after what was called the Brooks Brother event, where they stopped the vote counting in Florida during Bush v. Gore. And it was a very educated class of people that did that. Other things that have happened this week, a congressman-elect that was just elected to the House from Louisiana was only 41 years old. A Republican congressman, Luke Letlow, just died from COVID. Pretty scary when we think about a 41-year-old dying of COVID, since we always hear about elderly people. Like this is real, and anyone can be victim to it. There's also been accounts of people within the hostage, that were basically together under lockdown in the Capitol, of people getting COVID that were in lockdown, especially because some of the members who were Republican refused to wear masks in this closed space, in this lockdown space. So that's pretty upsetting as well. So in addition, last week we talked about how Twitter had decided to block Trump from its platform. It has blocked Trump indefinitely. There is no more @RealDonaldTrump. He is goodbye, adios, sayonara, 4 years too long, in my opinion. YouTube has also suspended Trump from its platform due to incendiary videos that he was posting to encourage people to storm the Capitol. So this is an interesting effect in terms of right-wing conservatives now saying, where do we go? They were going to go to Parler, but then Amazon and Apple pulled Parler off of their stores. So all of a sudden, there's nowhere to go. So the way that the right wing organizes in terms of coming up to the inauguration has become fractured. It's become disorganized. But the downside of it is that they were so obvious in terms of posting pictures of themselves on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever with Stop the Steal signs, that it was actually quite easy to track and identify them from a law enforcement perspective. So the downside is, will they be harder to track if they're disenfranchised from all the normal platforms? I'm not sure how I feel truthfully about this. One thing that I do find hilarious is some may know of the website called Bumble, which is a dating app. And that has become a tour de force investigative force for finding QAnon and MAGA people that were at the rally and reporting them to the FBI. So quite a few people have changed their Bumble profiles to conservative and are sending photos to the FBI of people that they find on the platform that have been bragging that they're at the rallies or sending their photo IDs, which I think is kind of hysterical. It's like, Washington, D.C., which tends to be very liberal, coming out as part of the investigation to the FBI. So why aren't liberals condemning the big tech censorship? So thanks, hey, Dr. K. I think there is a problem with it. I'm clearly liberal, as you could tell. I think there is a problem with it in the sense that there is so much power vested in these companies. And that they're blocking Donald Trump, but they're not blocking, the president of the Communist Party or lots of other actors that are malevolent or inciting violence or doing bad things. Trump has become this kind of paragon of like the person to block just because he was so active on social media. So I think it is problematic to think about how much power these tech platforms have. And there was a really interesting article in the New York Times basically asking that question. Like, yes, we all think that what Trump says is ridiculous, but is this actually a good thing? What does it say about suppression of free speech? So, hey, Dr. K, I think there are some liberals that are concerned with this and the level of power that the private sector has to basically put some voices out there and then totally shut down other voices. And it's within their own jurisdiction. There's no, private citizen base that they can go to. They're not asking for congressional approval. They basically, it's okay, what does Mark Zuckerberg think? And what does Jack Dorsey think? And what do the people that work at Twitter and Facebook think? That being said, I think there are grounds to taking down posts that are specifically inciting violence. So the media for a long time has been known as a force that is utilized to promote violence. And this wasn't even social media. So for example, the genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda, the Hutus took over the main radio station and they posted all this, or they talked on the radio, all this propaganda about how the Tutsis were cockroaches, they deserve to be slaughtered, they deserve to die, go kill your neighbors. And that was one of the main ways the genocide was perpetrated. So when free speech goes to the line of inciting violence, that's where I think there do need to be barriers, but how do you put them there? But thank you for that question. I agree. Sister K says you were making my day. Thank you, Sister K. Okay, so moving on. It was also interesting. So the sentiment in DC, people have been very worried. I teach a women's leadership course and have a young staffer for a congresswoman, and she was practically shaking thinking about the inauguration coming up and, safety and security in DC. However, 21,000 National Guard troops from around the country have been authorized to assist law enforcement with security concerning the inauguration. I went for a run yesterday. There are National Guard troops everywhere. They're not going to mess around. They are armed. So I think that generally speaking, there was awareness going up to the Capitol riot that there wasn't the law enforcement to take down that mob. I think people now on the right that are thinking about coming to protest or, want to storm the Capitol again now know, like, you can't mess with these guys. Like, this is, and girls. So there's been some really poignant photos of seeing troops like lying on the floor of the Capitol sleeping, and apparently members now have requested that they get beds because the sight is so disturbing of them kind of sleeping on the floor. But yeah, they're all over Washington, D.C. The other thing that was kind of funny that happened, I don't know if this is funny, is that in the terms of the worry about people coming from out of state for the inauguration for malevolent purposes, Airbnb and Hotel Tonight, which are again two tech platforms, canceled all hotel reservations in Washington, D.C. For this the inauguration. So I think that was actually a smart move. and they still reimburse people. So Airbnb still reimbursed people what they would have made from inauguration, which is a hefty chunk of change. So I think that was a good move because people that are coming from across state lines are coming to make trouble. What else is going on in the world? What's up, Tans? How you doing? So Samantha Power, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations under Obama, was just tapped to lead USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. I've always really liked Sam Power. She started her career as a journalist in Bosnia. She, didn't totally know what she was doing in Bosnia, but she knew that she had to report on it, that what was happening was not right. As somebody who worked and lived in Bosnia, working for the United States Embassy, it's a place very dear to my heart. And there were so much horrible things that happened there that shouldn't have happened. And she dedicated a lot of her early career to trying to raise awareness about the war in Bosnia and the genocides in Srebrenica and other areas in Bosnia in the American public. She even ran the New York Marathon, I think wearing a shirt that said, like, "Remember Srebrenica," which was the murder of 8,000, I think that number's wrong, the murder of thousands of Muslim boys and men in the woods, just executed in the back of the heads, in a place that was supposed to be a UN safe haven. Really horrible, super scary, called into so many questions about what is the purpose of the UN, and UN safe havens are clearly not actually really safe. So I think that Sam, in her book, Education of Idealists, she makes it really clear she's not afraid to bring the human element to foreign policy of saying, okay, I get it, but what is the human impact of this? Forget the geostrategic alignment of what does this do for Americans' positions in the world and how does this affect the global order? It's how does this affect humans on the ground? What happens to the Syrians if we don't intervene? She's always been very vocal in bringing that humanistic voice forward, which a lot of people in the foreign policy world are scared to do because they're said that they're weak. Apsu Sugar Pie wants to know if I plan on getting married. At some point, lots of career goals first. I want to run for office, but we'll see. Thanks for the question. So Sam Power, I think, is going to be great. Although there is some criticism in the foreign policy space in DC that the Biden administration is just recycling Obama appointees. So there's some kind of anger around that. But I do think Samantha Power is a really great person with a huge, huge, huge heart. And I think she'll do a great job running USAID. Two more things that are important to mention before we bring in our special guest, Abigail Esman. So Zach, can you bring in that photo with the green flags, please? So this actually happened December 30th, but I didn't mention it on my last show. And it was that, it's the one with the green flags. Is that this one? It says, for us, in Spanish, it says, for us, the right to decide. Legal abortion, safe, I can't remember what gratuito means. And like when we, like it's our choice when we need it. So this is a huge deal. So Argentina voted to legalize abortion at any stage up to 14 weeks of pregnancy. Beforehand, it was only legal in case of rape or danger to a life of the mother. This is huge because Latin America as a whole has really, really, really strict rules around abortion. And it's very detrimental to women. I looked at a study a few years ago that the number one cause of suicide was the number one cause of death amongst young women, like 18 to 25, and half of the women that committed suicide were pregnant. And in El Salvador, abortion is illegal, and you can get up to 30 years for having an abortion, even though you can only get up to 7 years for raping. It makes absolutely no sense. So the green, I actually have one of those somewhere around here from when I was in Argentina. The green handkerchief and the green is a symbol of the right to abortion. I also really liked what the president said about this, about why they ruled this way. He said, this is not a moral or religious issue. This is a public health issue. This is not about, whether you believe that abortion starts, at gestation or at sex or whatever it is. This is about public health. This is a public health issue. This is about women's health. Forget all of the religious and moral and blah, blah, blah. No, we want to ensure the health of women who are our people and our equal citizens. So that's really important. Now, in the US, we had the opposite happen. So just yesterday, or sorry, it wasn't yesterday, a few days ago, there was a very quiet ruling by the Supreme Court that kind of went under the radar with all of the Trump mumbo jumbo, that women must go to a hospital or medical center to pick up their medicine for illegal abortion and stand there and swallow it. So they can't send their husband, their boyfriend, whatever, to stop an unwanted pregnancy. In the past, they were able to obtain it at a pharmacy or have it delivered to them like other medicines. Now, this ruling exacerbates the chance that women can get COVID if they have to travel to get their medicine from a healthcare facility. Healthcare facilities are also hotbeds of COVID. I got COVID from a healthcare facility. Thankfully, I'm okay. And then they have to travel in person. And if it's a low income woman, they might have to travel hundreds of miles just so they can swallow a pill in front of someone. Now, here's why the ruling is dangerous. And I want to thank my sister, who's a lawyer, for helping me out with this. In a case called Whole Women's Health in 2015, the court, with no Trump justices, but it's before Kennedy left, ruled 5-4 that pre-viability abortion restrictions that burden the right to choose but present no benefit to the women cannot stand. So basically, if it's, okay, there's no benefit to the woman's health, but it's burdening her ability to have an abortion, that is illegal. But then last year, a concurrence by Roberts in a case called June Medical narrowed that ruling. This ruling appears to cement it because you're being forced to the doctor to swallow a pill, which imposes a major burden, but offers no benefit to the woman at all. So that's really interesting. And Gecko says, what a horrific ruling. Right, it kind of fell under the radar, all these Supreme Court things. So this is scary because this is the worry. I'm worried that this is only the beginning of rulings attacking reproductive rights that the new conservative Supreme Court will make, who are clearly making them on the basis of morality and religion and not based on women's health. Like, clearly not. So ironically, the Supreme Court made another decision that's supposedly so pro-life. They also made the decision to execute the only woman on death row, Lisa Montgomery. Her lawyer and those arguing for her to be removed from death row cited a long history of sexual abuse and violence and mental illness likely resulting from that violence. So my question is, isn't it a little bit ironic that those who claim to be pro-life are also pro-execution? And we're the only country in the Western world that still executes people, and in a really painful way. And in addition, all of these executions that the Supreme Court has done have been super spreader events of COVID. So, you know, what is going on in the US? I think one of the things the Democrats need to look at immediately is how do we add a justice to the Supreme Court? Because anybody who poses a threat to the Catholic Church, you know, gay people, Muslim, Jews, homosexuals, women, anyone who the Catholic Church does not like could end up being totally screwed. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to bring on my guest. If you could just flip to the picture of her book, Zach. So thank you. So Abigail Esman is an award-winning essayist and journalist. She's based in New York and the Netherlands, and is the author of the book that you see here, Rage, Narcissism, Patriarchy, and the Culture of Terrorism. She also wrote The Radical State, How Jihad is Winning Over Democracy in the West. Previously a columnist for Forbes, her work has also appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Foreign Policy, and Politico, as well as Vogue, Town and Country, and Slate, which is where I found out about her. Zach, can you flip to that America is attempting to exit an abusive relationship? Thank you. She is a regular contributor to the Investigative Project on Terrorism and has spoken widely on the subject of terrorism, extremism, and domestic abuse. Hey, Abigail, welcome.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you.
The way that I found out about Abigail was reading her piece in Slate, and I was so intrigued And it was called America is Attempting to Exit an Abusive Relationship. And it's when the woman finally leaves that things tend to get violent. It's fascinating. Yeah. It's a fascinating analysis of Trump refusing to leave office. So I wonder if you could dive a little bit deeper into what you meant by that in terms of Trump's, refusal to leave.
Well, what's scary is, of course, that this was before the insurrection that I wrote it. So it speaks volumes that in fact, it is very much a matter of America exiting an abusive relationship. The point that I was trying to make is that most of the time when women leave an abusive relationship, this is the most dangerous time for them. This is when and it's generally a man, tends to get desperate, and he will do anything, including kill her, in order to regain control of her and his power over her. This is exactly what we've just seen happen with Donald Trump, who was willing to do absolutely anything he could to maintain his power over the people. There are so many links, which is what I talk about in Rage, about the narcissistic rage that is what drives abusers, but it is also what drives dictators, and it is certainly what drives Donald Trump in pretty much everything he does. And so that narcissistic rage that erupts when an abuser is unable to have things his way is what we see Trump doing over and over and over again. And it gets worse and worse over time as the beatings get worse and worse over time.
Can you describe the definition of pathological narcissism?
It's generally defined as a real psychological syndrome, as a sense of grandiosity, an unwillingness to take responsibility, a sense very often that everyone else is to blame for anything that goes wrong in your life, a sense of utter superiority to everybody else, and being unable to handle anything that thwarts your ability to make things happen the way you want them to be.
Sounds like Trump.
Right. It also sounds a lot like terrorists.
Yeah, absolutely. And I liked what you said here. Pathological narcissists are by nature incapable of, you said what's more, because pathological narcissists are by nature incapable of empathy, they pose a particularly destructive, heinous threat. The narcissistic he-man, I love this language, slams and swaggers his way through the world, demanding, threatening, taking pride in his destruction, oblivious to conscience or consequences.
Right. That was from today's piece.
Powerful stuff. I mean, it's, and I think that, taking pride in his destruction, if we look at the people that mobbed the Capitol, they were proud as hell that they were there.
They were, because it showed how powerful and manly they were. Or in the case of women, how they were able to support this insurrection in defense of their families, which is what you see very often with ISIS brides. The other thing that I find so ironic about all of this is, of course, because they're so narcissistic, they had to film themselves and post it to YouTube. And they had to show their IDs, and they had to take souvenirs and go home and show everybody where they'd been, because they're very proud of what they've done, but they also feel like they're real heroes and how wonderful they are, and everybody should praise them for it. That, of course, is what ended up getting them into trouble. So in that sense, their narcissism worked in our favor. But it tells you something about how they see their role and the kind of sense of heroism that they associate with what they've done.
So let's go deeper there in terms of, we've just started to tap into the motivation of this armed mob to attack the Capitol building on Wednesday. Can we go a little bit deeper there in terms of what you think, got this, they bludgeoned a police officer to death. They put gallows up. They were roaming around the Capitol trying to get into the speaker's areas. You know, what in the actual F were they thinking from your perspective?
I think they thought they were rescuing their people. They were rescuing, you know, what the Trump's words before they all marched to the Capitol was, "You won't have a country anymore." And they were there to fight for their country and the country that they want and that he has given them, which is a country that favors them over everybody else, that allows enormous amounts of white privilege, that will continue to reward them for their conspiracy theories. But it is the idea of an America that Trump has sold to them and that they took with great pleasure. And that's the America they went to fight to keep, because they are afraid that they're going to lose their guns and immigrants are going to come in and take all their jobs and all the things that Trump has been spouting at them for the last 5 years, 6 years during his from the beginning of his campaign.
And you describe how, and your book really is this very poignant linking, showing the psychology and motivations of domestic abusers, how similar they are to that of terrorists and Trump people. And you know, you point out in your Slate article how Trump was known to, you know, Trump's ex-wife stated under oath that he'd beaten and raped her at least once. And he's been accused of multiple counts of rape. So, you know, what is that link between domestic violence and terrorism?
Well, it took me 260 something pages to explain that. But in general, you can see that there are almost no terrorists that I could find in all the research that I did that did not have some background with domestic abuse, either as victims or perpetrators or both. And that's very telling because it speaks to a worldview in which violence is a way of getting what you want, a way of asserting your manhood, a way of making sure that the hierarchy remains in your favor. The kinds of people who are abused children who are abused tend to grow up with the idea that violence is legitimate in a way that people who are not abused do not. And that's not true for all of them, but it's true for a very high percentage. And that can then spill out if they're given a cause, if they're given a reason to fight for something that they believe is right. It's very easy to manipulate that idea among certain people. Certainly within certain societies, so that they are really ready to fight to win and fight whatever it takes in order to win. There's also an honor culture. There's a relationship in terms of honor culture and the ways that people think of their own honor and the honor of their people or their families. Yeah, and that's connected in there as well.
I thought that was really interesting that you identify 3 things that have been linked by psychiatrists and sociologists to violence and terrorism. Shame, which obviously comes if you're beaten or you beating. Shame is very potent. Pathological or malignant narcissism, and a culture of honor. And I think that culture of honor has been kind of missing. Like, I've heard the other things. I haven't really heard about the honor culture aspect, which I think is a really interesting addition to the literature and knowledge base around terrorism. So can you describe a little bit more, what is an honor culture? What does that mean?
That's a difficult question to answer. An honor culture is one in which let me put it in a different way. We tend in America to live, most of us, and certainly in the Northeast, in what we consider a dignity culture, where we maintain a certain dignity, or we try to preserve our dignity. Dignity is different than honor. Honor has to do with the way other people judge you, and what your role is within that society based on how you are judged. So in an honor culture, you need to always be right. You need to be able to save face. Saving face is sort of the big analogy that I use and the metaphor that I use throughout the book. And it works on many levels, partly because it's, again, related to narcissism. And narcissism, of course, has to do with saving face, right? Being beautiful, being attractive, saving face in relation to those around you. So to lose honor is really to lose everything. It's to become worthless and utterly humiliated. And then you go back into shame. And once you're shamed, that incites the need for violence. It's a cycle, it's a web, it's very complicated to go through it. But in an honor culture, the highest value is to save face, is to not be wrong, to not be embarrassed or shamed in front of other people.
And you talk about, so, I think the Western world has always been really horrified by honor killings.
Mm-hmm.
Which are basically when a woman is seen to shame the family in a Muslim culture.
Exactly.
The father or brother sometimes
or uncle or mother or husband
will kill the daughter as a way to regain honor for the family, because apparently being a murderer and murdering your own family member is not shameful. I don't get that.
No, it's a way of regaining honor. It's a
I know,
way
but it's so interesting. How do we reframe that? It's like, it's so interesting. It's like, yeah, it's a way of regaining honor to kill the girl. In American culture, we're like, you kill your relative, that is not honorable. Like, you are in prison. Like, go away.
We say that, but there are actually cultures in the West where it's more on the line, where honor killing is not only, it's primarily in Muslim cultures, but it's not only in Muslim cultures. And this sense of women holding the honor of the family is also not unique to Muslim cultures. You see it in Latin American cultures very often. You see it in fundamentalist cultures of all different shapes and sizes.
Thank you for making that point. That's really, really important. You also mentioned that, or I think you quote someone else who says that if we look at white supremacists, that more than any other factor, support for violence against women is linked with support for violent extremism. And then I really like this quote, I can't remember who it's from, that misogyny is the gateway drug for white supremacy.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It is. And in fact, it's what's frightening is how true it is. And if you didn't believe it before, Donald Trump should prove to you how right it actually is. I mean, it's very clear that he was a misogynist long before he was a racist in any case, or a blatant racist to the extent that he is. And there are in white supremacist circles, you see this all the time. Women are relegated to the housekeeper, the wife, the good mother, the baby maker. Yeah. And when you compare those groups, those white supremacist groups, and the way they look at women and women's place in those groups, it's almost exactly the same as what you saw in the Islamic State. Virtually the only difference is they don't get killed for.
Do you mean, sorry, Abigail, do you mean in terms of the roles that they were given in the hierarchy?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. The women are there to support their men. The women are there to have more babies in order to populate the world with more people of their kind. The women are not there necessarily to fight. They're not welcome very often on white supremacist websites. Their role is to support the warrior, hero, king, soldier that is the white supremacist man. And that is exactly the role of women in the Islamic State.
So let's talk about Islamic State for a second, since that hasn't been on the tip of the tongue lately. You talk a little bit about what lured so many Westerners to fight for the Islamic State. Can we talk about that, and from a gendered perspective, so the men and then also the women that went to marry the heroes?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it is, again, very similar to what lures people to white supremacy. Um, it's 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 on multiple levels, right? I mean, they are indoctrinated. Many of them are converts who are new to Islam, and so they are easily brought into extremist circles. They get targeted online. But it is this, again, this sense of fighting for the honor of your people and fighting for the preservation of your people and being the warrior hero, the martyr, who comes to the defense of his people and therefore is more of a man. And for the women, we all grow up. Well, I grew up, right, with this fantasy that one day you'll marry Prince Charming.
The princess stories.
Right, exactly. You will marry this wonderful man who will sweep you off on his white horse and carry you off into this fabulous castle with its magnificent gardens, and you will be a princess forever, and everything will be glorious. Mm-hmm. That's the fantasy that they sold to the girls who were recruited. That was the idea that they really believed they were going to get. They were going to go off to this wonderful land, this fantasy land that did not actually exist the way it was sold to them. And they would be married off to these princes and soldiers and warriors who would care for them forever and provide for them in every possible way. And they saw themselves as, as the good maidens who were being saved by these great men.
I remember too, when I was reading about some of this literature, the role that women played in recruiting other women, not just from a romantic perspective, but from a friendship perspective, like preying on women who were lonely and saying, come join the sisterhood. We're all here for Allah. We love you. We're such a tight community. And having these women who were lonely and disenfranchised, like in London, for example, because they were Muslim, like all of a sudden be like, oh my God, these women love me. They want to be my friend. Like it was like back to like middle school. Like, oh my God, they want to be my friend. Like the popular girls.
Exactly. The most popular clique in the school, and they've asked you in. Exactly. There is that sense of the assuaging the loneliness. I think that played less of a part than the rest of it, but it absolutely played a part. And again, for a lot of those girls, they were unhappy at home. They lived in difficult families, and they wanted out.
Right. And then it's similar with, you talk about female suicide bombers a lot in your book, about how with female suicide bombers, similarly, a lot of them come from domestic abuse situations, and joining a terrorist group or blowing themselves up seems like a better option than staying in their abusive household, which is pretty horrifying.
It is, although in many cases they deliberately failed, or they would approach an Israeli police officer and say something that made it very clear that they were strapped, so that they would be arrested. And what they really wanted, they wanted to go to jail. They didn't want to die. A lot of them did want to die, but the research that I used was taken from the women who had been imprisoned. And most of them went to prison on purpose because they wanted to escape their husbands or their fathers.
It was seen as safer than...
It was a safe place to be, absolutely. And again, among a sisterhood, right? They were...
Yeah. You also are of the opinion in the book, so one of the things for the audience that had happened was that a lot of these Western women who went to join IS then ended up in IDP camps within Iraq or Syria, and with some of them with children, and then were saying, we want to go home to the UK, to Austria. And there was a big security debate over whether or not we should let these women back into this country. Do they pose a national security threat? So your opinion was that they should be accepted back into their countries. Why?
That wasn't my opinion.
It wasn't? Okay, that's what I thought you said in the book, that they... Well, okay, so tell me your opinion.
No, I think it's a very, very difficult decision, because women have gone there for different reasons. They have suffered tremendously. Some of them are still radicalized. I think it has to be, I don't think they can make a blanket policy on this. And it's an issue that Europe still struggles with. In the Netherlands, it's a constant subject of discussion and debate in the parliament, which collapsed today. But things aren't easy anywhere.
So you think it should be an individual?
I think it needs to be done on an individual case, because women who went for different reasons, and some of them really, even if they were radicalized when they went there, are not anymore, and they want out. If they are willing to do if they're willing to accept the prison sentence, if they're willing to accept the terms on which they would be readmitted, I think individually, on an individual basis, they should be, but many not.
And that's the problem too with, closing Guantanamo has been, you can't just close it and then be like, where do these people go?
Right.
A lot of people also work from Yemen, and they didn't want to send them back to Yemen, which is in a war. And then, but it's like, you can't, and international law says that somebody can't be stateless. So
Right.
Where do you put the people that you took to Guantanamo?
Well, the question about statelessness is an ongoing one now, in light of what happened with all the Europeans who went to the Islamic State, because a lot of them lost their citizenship as a result of having gone, and they are in fact stateless. So this is a real question right now of what to do with people who have no real citizenship anymore.
So you also talk about how religion is not the causal factor for violent extremism.
Right.
And that's, I mean, the media, especially after 9/11, was like, it's all Muslim people, it's Muslim, blah, blah, blah.
Well, we just saw a few days ago that that's not true, right? It's a cultural issue and not a religious issue. So it has to do with the cultures in which people are raised, and Arab culture is an honor culture. Arab culture is one in which boys are raised a certain way. Did you lose my feed? Can you still see me?
I can hear you.
There we go. Okay. Boys are raised a certain way, girls are raised a certain way. Values are such that violence is acceptable, and under circumstances which it isn't to us. That's not, that is affirmed in many Quranic verses, and it's affirmed in many interpretations of the Quran, but it's not unique to the Quran, and it's also not the religion itself. It's a cultural thing that we have as well in America, for instance, in the American South, which I talk about a lot in Rage, which is also an honor culture.
Right. And you looked at, I had Milan Verveer on the show a few weeks ago, and we talked about the best and worst states in the US to be a woman. I think the 3 worst were all in the South.
Yeah, they are. And there is, you'll see there's an appendix at the back of my book when you finish it, that compares the rates of domestic violence, the rates of public violence, and which states where it converges. And it's extraordinary how close they are.
Interesting. I didn't even see this. Violence against women by, so there's in the back.
By country, by state. Best states to be a woman, worst states to be a woman, worst countries to be a woman, something like that.
Yeah, it's just wild. Yeah, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, like consistently not great. States where women are most likely to be murdered by men. What about this one? I hadn't seen Alaska come up before.
Alaska?
Yeah.
Alaska's in there #1 almost all the time.
Why? What is the culture of Alaska? I feel like I know nothing.
It has the highest rate of violence in general in the country, I believe. It's a red state. It's a very red state. It's in some ways an isolated culture of its own, because it's geographically so distant. But it's an honor state. It's a very strong honor culture in Alaska, and they have more guns and they have more violence. And apparently they have more dead women than other states.
Unreal. Something else I want to run by you is so in The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about how Romania had this like inexplicable reduce in violent crime and was trying to figure out why. And then they looked and saw that Romania had legalized abortion about, I think it was like 18 to 20 years before this decrease in violent crime. And one of the things you talk about a lot is that people who, unwanted children could be more subject to violence, abuse, just not good lives. And so Gladwell's kind of positing that those are the people that end up in violent crime. What do you think about that link? And then what does that say about abortion rights?
I don't know enough about that. I don't want to speak to that. I don't want to speak to what it means on a larger sociological level. I just don't feel like I can do that. Sorry.
But what about unwanted children? Like,
unwanted children are more likely to be abused, of course. Of course they are. Whether that really translates into a reduction in crime, I think there's probably other issues involved. But
right.
certainly, if you don't want a child, you're not ready to have a child. And very often, the people who are most abusive are the people who are too young, really too young to be parents. And they don't know how to deal with the needs of a child. Teen mothers are going through their own stuff, and they're in their own, they have their own narcissistic needs, and they have their own wants, and suddenly it's all been frustrated, and they've, and their boyfriends are there, and their boyfriends are giving them a hard time, and yeah, it's not a good situation. But I can't speak to how that affects violent crime in general.
So 2 more questions for you, because I promised I would have you out of here so your mom can watch TV. Although I kind of want to interview your mom.
You're welcome to interview my mom. She's great.
I'm sure she's fantastic. You said she was friends with Tony, right? That's so funny.
She is friends with Tony. Her real greatness comes from what she did in the 60s. She was a real pioneer in the art world.
Oh, so cool.
Worked with Warhol and all those guys. She's got some good stories.
Amazing. Yeah. So one other thing that you said that I found really interesting is about empathy. Mm-hmm. And you say it is precisely because we have empathy, too much empathy even, that we stay, that we appease, that we allow the violence to continue.
Yeah.
We try to understand the abuser's point of view, the grievances of the terrorists, to feel what they must feel as deeply as they do to make them violence. We berate ourselves, not them, and the terror continues. I get that on a personal level, right? That, you kind of appease, you make excuses for your partner who's doing abusive things. But on a sociological level, I mean, we're sitting here on this show trying to understand the motivations of our mob. So are you saying that, we're being too easy on them in some sense?
No. I'm not. You can hear my dog in the background. Sorry. He wants to come and watch the news. Okay. This is his hour to watch the news. No, I'm saying that after 9/11, we kept talking about what is it, what did we do? What terrible things has America done that they would have done this to us? Why did they hate us? What's wrong with the way we behave? And there were so many Americans who blamed America. There were so many Americans who wondered how we should change who we are and how we are, because we had obviously hurt people who responded with these attacks. Sorry about the dog.
That's okay. I know everyone on here is used to seeing dogs, naked people in the background, all sorts of stuff. Babies clawing at people's feet, like pretty much everything possible. So let's end on a last question, which is trying to be a little bit hopeful, which is you just wrote an article for Slate, I believe today, that says that you think that Joe Biden can help fix this madness and horrificness that's happening.
Yeah, why? I do.
Why?
Primarily, and I talk about this in the piece, more than anything because he authored the Violence Against Women Act. And we are going from an administration under a man who credibly raped and beat his wife and other women, to the man who criminalized that kind of behavior. And because of the association of misogyny and white supremacism, misogyny and violence, misogyny and terrorism, and the abuse of women within extremist cultures. If you look at all of that and you look at Donald Trump, you can see how it all came together to be what it became, really what it finally became last week. And if you look at Joe Biden, you look at the man who recognized the horror of this at a time that no one else did, whose life has been based on fighting that kind of abuse. And I think metaphorically it speaks volumes. I really believe that this will make a difference in terms of how we look at each other. There's the rhetoric, just the rhetoric alone. The tone of voice is different. The calm. But I think this is a man who understands what it is to face something very violent and very ugly and tame it. And I think that he can do that now in this country in a way that nobody else maybe could.
And empathy, you know, you raised the point that
empathy.
He's very empathetic.
He's famous for his empathy, and empathy is crucial if we're going to stop hurting other people.
Yeah. You can tell when he talks about, you know, that seat across the table, like he really feels for families that have lost people to COVID. Like you could totally feel it in his heart. It's not just hyperbole.
No, it's not hyperbole, and it's not just a cliche that people say about him. I mean, even Lindsey Graham has said wonderful things about Joe Biden and the person that he is. I think he does really feel that, and his life has really been a testament to that. Yeah. And again, if you call on people to have empathy, and you call on them to reach within themselves and find it, maybe they will.
I like that. It's a beautiful note to end on. Abigail, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Her book, Rage, Narcissism, Patriarchy, and the Culture of Terrorism, hot off the shelf. Get it now. It is a fascinating read. I think it totally transformed how I look at terrorism and how I look at how to approach it from a national security perspective. So go get her book. And Abigail, I'm sure we'll continue to see your extremely smart commentary as we move forward. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Good night.
Take care. Good night. Well, everyone, that was Abigail Esman, the author of Rage, Narcissism, Patriarchy, and the Culture of Terrorism. The book really, for those who are just tuning in now, it really just shows how these kind of misogynistic feeding grounds, like the incel communities, if people have heard about of incel, people who are voluntarily incelibate, become kind of feeder groups for white supremacist groups, how this linking of misogyny of women and terrorism is linked. And if we think about it from a national security perspective, she literally said, I didn't find a single terrorist who wasn't either abused himself or hadn't been an abuser. So from a national security perspective, what do we do there? Do we flag domestic abusers as people who could potentially become terrorists or white supremacists? I mean, it's so many people. Like, how do you approach that from a national security perspective? I think it's a really interesting dilemma. And the book too, we didn't really talk about it, but it really shares some very poignant descriptions of her own past of being in abusive relationships and why she stays, and this balance of the micro of, you know, here's my personal story, and then moving into the macro societal phenomenon is really fascinating, because it's usually that a book is told from one person's perspective and this is my story, or it's about society. Hers weaves together this kind of individual narrative of being in abusive relationships with men where she kept kind of staying and making excuses for them, and then broader societal narratives and stories of terrorists and their particular backgrounds. Again, highly recommend it. It's also actually like a pretty quick read. I'm almost done with it. So what do we have coming up in the world? So inauguration is on Wednesday. We'll see what happens there. Hopefully it goes off. Supposedly Donald Trump is supposed to leave the White House Wednesday morning and let Biden basically take office. So he doesn't have to, we don't have to drag him out of the White House kicking and screaming like a child. So that's good news. Hopefully there will not be violence at the inauguration. I'm going to be wandering around trying to interview some people, hoping I don't get killed. Luckily, this is where, you have to recognize white privilege, and I can't be too feisty, I'm aware. And we're going to have a new president in less than a week. Like, that's wild. After 4 years of anxiety and craziness, and every day something new that Trump has done to upset someone, or a new tweet. Like, I thought that was a really interesting thing that she said about how, we're going from like a president that's like this, like, to a president that's like this. It's like calm and soothing, calming the country. Something that also came out that I thought was pretty upsetting was that the Biden team has had to create an entire vaccine distribution plan. The Trump administration literally had no plan for how to distribute vaccines in the middle of a global pandemic where rates are out of control and people are dying every single day. There was no federal plan to manage distribution. It's like, what are they doing? And like, literally, what are they doing? They can't protect our people. Like, our national security is our public health right now. It's protecting our people. It's getting this vaccine out so that people stop dying. And there was literally no plan to distribute vaccines. So the Biden team is coming up with that and has hired like a really competent person to be able to do that. And now vaccines are rolling out to all people over 65, and hopefully we'll just get faster and faster. My heart goes out to you if you've been affected by COVID. I think everyone has here, or you've had to suffer through it. It is not a pleasant experience, and it's incredibly sad. And I hope that this year brings health and calm to our country, and people can visit their families again. And I saw so much anxiety this week from so many people about what's happening in the US. So I just wanted to finish off on a positive note. I was chatting with the chief of staff for Bob Menendez, Senator Bob Menendez, and I think it's Senator. Yes. And I was just expressing my condolences and asking if he needed anything. And here's what he said to me. His name's Fred Turner. He said, Wednesday was a very sad day for our country, but it did ultimately prove the resiliency of our democracy and our institutions. If I wasn't an optimist, I wouldn't have spent the last 20 plus years doing what I do. I firmly believe that brighter days are ahead. There may be additional bumps along the way, and this country is being tested more so than it has at any time since the Civil War. That's pretty profound. But we will get through it. It's the American way. So with that being said, I will see you next week. And I mentioned a lot about the Women's Leadership Program that I host. So I'll throw that into the chat if they're actually women watching, which I know the Twitch stream is usually not super female, but I host a Women's Leadership Program. We're accepting applications right now. And I also want to thank stream inspectors, and especially Zach and Megan, for doing an amazing job producing this show, the awesome graphics, putting up the images, helping me with all the technology. They're really an invaluable team, and I'm super, super happy to be partnering on this show with them. So make sure you like it if you're on YouTube, like it if you're on Facebook. If you're on Twitch, I think you can become a follower. If you really like this episode, I would super appreciate it if you could share it with your friends, so that we can figure out how do we go to the next stage and heal this country from division. So I will see everybody next week when we have a new president. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.